An American pilot who flies on a US airline company has come out to courts to share his or her perspective on what happened with the Boeing 737, particularly the type of training that pilots received and how it's a man. He believes that it's inadequate. And he also was reprimanded, allegedly reprimanded, after he brought up the inadequate level of training. So let's go to graphic 30. According to courts, like pilots at other US airlines using the 737 MAX, this pilot was only required by the US Federal Aviation Administration to take a video tutorial on the new jet, as he was already certified to fly earlier variants of the 737 aircraft on which the MAX is based. Now, it might seem like, well, he's got training on the plane already, right? I mean, just a little bit of an update, what's the big deal? But this pilot, who wished to remain anonymous because he's fearful that he might lose his job, says, no, actually, the software is completely different. Let me give you the details in what he said. The video tutorial assigned to pilots before the Lion Air crash did not cover a new anti-stall flight system capable of sharply pointing the plane downward, whose role was highlighted in the preliminary investigation of that crash. And so the US pilot says, after completing it, meaning the tutorial, over the next couple of days, I got to thinking that, they said it wasn't a different airplane, it was just the same airplane with some differences. But I went back over my notes and I went back in the iPad and reviewed some of the information, and I realized it was the same airframe, but it had different instrumentation. Some of the things were in different places. It sat on the ground differently, and it was just a different plane. So he said, look, this is not adequate, and he had a list of requests, but those lists of requests were not fulfilled, and later he was reprimanded. So I'll give you the details on that in a second, but Cenk, I wanted to get your thoughts.
Yeah, so God, this guy was so right, and of course he was punished for it. Welcome to America. The main problem, if you remember, from the first Boeing crash, was that the sensors were faulty. It appears that's the leading consensus theory, that when the plane went up a little bit, its nose pointed up a little bit, the sensors would overreact and point the plane downward, and that is why it would crash. Now, when he went through the simulator, he noticed that that was not in there, okay? And he'd already seen one of the planes crash. So this is between the two crashes. And he's like, they didn't train us on what happens if the sensors start pointing the plane downward. He's like, you could look it up mid-flight, but you've only got a couple of seconds to adjust there. So we really should know that. 100% right. And so we're worried, of course, in the second crash that might have happened again. In fact, people are worried that in those crashes, the pilots did try to do what Boeing taught them to do to adjust for it, because it's only supposed to happen in autopilot. And then if you take it off of autopilot, you're supposed to be able to manually correct it. But they're worried that in the second crash, the pilots did that and they were not able to correct it manually either, which would be deeply concerning. And it's a good thing that the FAA eventually, after almost every other country did it, finally granted those planes in America. But for a profit motive and because of government capture, usually our government doesn't care about what corporations do. And so they'll risk our lives. And the pilot says, not just my life, I got all the folks on this plane, I'm not gonna do it without them. So one time he says, well, you gotta at least bring an instructor with me on the flight so that there's someone on board that knows how to react quickly, because we don't wanna endanger these people's lives. They can't get him the instructor. Now, then they decide, yeah, you know what? As usual, we're not going to ask the corporation to do the right thing. We're just gonna punish the employee.
Right, so he did get punished, and so he had two main requests. Request number one was, can you guys train us at least with like a simulator rather than having us watch a video tutorial? And so that request was denied, and he wanted an instructor for the first flight in order to have someone by his side who can kind of walk him through everything. That was also denied. So after he brought attention to those issues, they decided to take him off the flight. And that is a huge deal because the pilot missed out on an opportunity to make about $3,000.
Yep.
He says, let's go to graphic 34, quote, "I was punished not just from being taken off the trip and having the pay subtracted from me, but by having a missed trip put in my schedule, which is the same as not showing up for the trip. I've never had a missed trip. And I was shocked that even though I was sitting in the seat in the airplane when I was taken off the trip, that I was given a missed trip." So this is a negative mark on his record. And it's a negative mark on his record and a missed opportunity to make money because he raised some legitimate concerns.
So he clearly lost out on $3,000. So that's one thing. The second thing is, look at what they did. They took the most vigilant pilot there was and made him appear to be the least vigilant, like, oh, he missed the trip. Now, another thing that they could have done is, hey, look, the guy brings up legitimate issues. He doesn't want to go on this flight, but we're gonna go, okay? Right or wrong, we're gonna maybe endanger those people. We think we're not endangering them. We're gonna take him off the flight. But we're not gonna say that he missed the trip because he didn't miss it. He was in his seat, he was ready to go if we'd brought him. We're not gonna dock him the pay, and we're certainly not gonna put it on his record. No, let's choose to do all of that. Not only have it be unsafe, but punish the guy who pointed out that it might be unsafe. When they eventually got him an instructor on his flight, because he continued to fly, the instructor also had never flown on a plane like that before.
Disaster. It's a complete and utter disaster. And just to add a little more evidence to the arguments that are being made right now, Boeing has released a statement about another issue that they have detected. So let's go to graphic 35. A Boeing-led review of a stall prevention system suspected in the deadly crashes of two of the company's new 737 MAX jetliners has detected an additional software problem that the FAA has ordered fixed before the planes are cleared to fly again, the company acknowledged. So there are apparently multiple issues. Boeing is conceding that point. And so there's no reason why this pilot should be reprimanded or punished in any way for doing the right thing and actually caring about the safety of the passengers.
And the last thing is that I keep thinking back to those couple of days where the FAA would not ground the planes. And eventually they succumbed to enormous pressure from the American people saying, we don't want to fly on planes that might crash. But for a while, they were trying to still let Boeing get away with it because they're like, oh, there's companies have to make money. This is going to cost them profits. I mean, your lives, whatever. But profits, that's so important. For several days, they would not ground those planes because they said, we're sure there's nothing wrong with them. Now look at all the things coming out wrong with them. It's really gross how multinational corporations have totally taken over our government. On the go? Don't worry, we got you covered. You can still listen to TYT at our new podcast network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, the Google Play Store, or at tyt.com/podcast.